Welcome to Talk Radioisotopes Going Nuclear on Cancer. I'm your host, Scott Larrivee. Talk Radioisotopes is your one-stop shop for information on all the latest trends in radiopharmaceuticals, as well as insights and the advancements that are transforming the prognosis for the future of cancer care. I am happy to have alongside me a wonderful guest that I think you're all going to enjoy if you don't know him already. Dr. Luke Nordquist, who founded XCancer, formerly the Urology Cancer Center. You founded that in 2010 with the primary vision of becoming a center of excellence and medical destination for patients suffering with prostate and other urologic cancers. And where did he do this? Omaha, Nebraska. So today, XCancer is a globally recognized research program that provides access to the most effective and individualized treatment options available. They serve patients from over 40 states, coast to coast. All these folks call XCancer home for their cancer care. He's also a member of Nusano's Medical Radioisotope Advisory Board. So welcome to Talk Radioisotopes, Dr. Luke Nordquist.
Thank you, Scott. It's such an honor to be here. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time.
We're thrilled to have you here. I think I first saw you a few years ago at a targeted radiopharmaceuticals conference in Boston, and what came through loud and clear for me was just your passion for making sure patients everywhere, not just the coasts, have access to the latest treatments and clinical trials. And that's exactly what you've built. Tell us a little bit about XCancer and how you built that organization and what you're up to today.
Yeah, sure. So, my background, I'm a medical oncologist by training, trained at Sloan Kettering, specialized in prostate cancer there, and came back to Omaha in 2004, joined a large practice, kind of grew. Visions were diverging, and after about 6 years, I wanted to break away and do more clinical trials. So I started what was called the Urology Cancer Center for the simple fact I wanted to focus in prostate cancer, and there was a dominant urology practice in town called the Urology Center. So I wanted to be called the Urology Cancer Center. I'd take care of the prostate cancer patients for them, right? Good branding, very easy. And my vision then was just to be a busy medical oncologist in Omaha and provide good care, focusing on clinical trials. So I started that in 2010 with 3 employees, 2 clinical trials, Cougar 301 and 302 for abiraterone. They already closed to accrual by the time I moved them over to my center. And since then we grew. We now have over 55 employees, have for a number of years. And we've conducted several hundred phase 0 to phase 3 clinical trials at my center. Nearly 2,000 patients accrued to my center. We run about 150 people on clinical trials at any one time. And we see patients from about 43 states now, 9 countries. I had a patient a couple weeks ago from Moscow, Russia that came over. And a lot of it's for the clinical trials, right? So it makes a marked difference. It differentiates you. Last year, we had about 20 people referred down from Mayo Clinic for clinical trials we had that they didn't have access to. We've now done 23 first in world at my center. And if we were a sports team, we're not doing anything fancy. We're not running the trick plays. We'd be saying we're doing the fundamentals, right? So we focus on efficiencies, quality, accuracy, completeness. And we've developed that into a point where a couple of years ago, actually almost 7 years ago now, I looked at all my important staff that I couldn't do without, and I said, each one of you, if one of you was hit by a bus, I'd be in trouble. Let's start looking at what you do, and we created processes for each one of them, and then we turned it into electronic processes, and then it grew into this electronic software. Now I have 2 software developers on staff. We have our own proprietary research software. And it's all about, again, creating efficiencies where we can open clinical trials in weeks, not months or over a year. On the Vision trial with lutetium, we put the first patient in the world on. In fact, we put the first 17 people in the world on. And according to Novartis, we had the highest quality data of all 90 centers. So what happened a few years ago then is other community cancer centers who are struggling financially, they're struggling to find a place, they don't have a reputation to get into research. They came to us saying, can you help us? And just like people have a credit score that goes up or down with their finances, doctors that do research have a score that goes up or down depending on how quickly they respond, how many people they say they're going to put on, did they follow through, what's the quality of their data. And so with performances on trials like the Vision, our number shoots way up. And so, we're competing now with the Sloan Ketterings, the MD Andersons, the Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinics of the world, where we might be chosen over those by a lot of these centers just because at that point it's not necessarily name brand recognition. It's who can get it open quickly, get patients on, and give us the complete, quick data. But it takes a lot to run a research program. I mean, we have people that do budgets and contracts, regulatory documents with the IRB and FDA, the data entry, coordinators, finance, tracking, paying invoices, pass-throughs back to hospitals. It takes a village. And we have that. So what we created then is a program where we could go out to other community cancer centers and say, if you're interested, we can do that for you. All you need to be is an investigator at your site. We'll find the trials, not just in prostate, for any tumor type, breast, lung, and open them at your center. But let us do the budgets, contracts, regulatory data entry, use our software. And we're not a separate program. We integrate with them. So we bring them up to train them in our system. And they often call, sometimes daily, for advice, inclusion, exclusion criteria, or how to fill some paperwork out with the regulatory. And so we've worked now with as many as 45 community cancer centers from coast to coast. And some of them took it and ran with it on their own. Some we're still working with. We just have a new one in Dothan, Alabama. A big one for us, obviously, is Dr. Oliver Sardar. He's obviously really well established in research, obviously a mentor to me even. He's been at Mayo Clinic for a number of years. And personally, between you and me, he's probably felt like a little bit of like a fish out of water up there. He's a Louisiana guy. And so he's going back to Louisiana now, starting a private practice clinic with a hospital system called LCMC. And XCancer is going to run his research for him. So that's what we like to do.
Very cool. Well, Going back to your sports team analogy, it sounds like if you are a sports team, you're one of those that's perpetually hanging around and threatening for a championship every year. Yeah. And maybe you're a college school that has disseminated a bunch of coaches off into other schools that are all hanging around in the college tournaments. So very impressive and really amazing work that you've done. Congratulations.
Thank you. We like to get back in other places too. So, to me, XCancer, the name, I had to come up with a meaning. What does that mean? Because we do so many things. Research is one of them. But I kind of came up with the tagline that, XCancer is expanding the reach of cancer innovations. And that could be innovations on research, because if we can have all these other community cancer centers around the country doing research, and not just any research, but high quality, first in world, cutting edge, where patients can get it closer to home and not travel, that's very beneficial. We're also trying to do that abroad over in Tanzania, Africa. But some of it is financial burdens. If we can come up with newer ideas to help patients afford care or travel for care. Again, I brought up Tanzania, Africa. I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro twice. And as part of that, I learned the cancer situation in Africa and Tanzania. And they have 65 million people, 3 cancer centers. And I used to think naively, what can they do? They don't have near the treatments we have. But they have probably 75% of the treatments that we have. But the problem lies in access. So somebody gets a chemotherapy here, they drive home, their spouse drives them home, they stay at a house, they have a problem, they can call in. Now imagine you get your treatment, you have to walk 10 kilometers home, you don't have a phone or refrigerator to store supportive medicines and things, and you may not come back. So one of the things we did actually with my son Thomas's help, he's the race car driver, and when he was in high school.
Yeah, we got to get into that before we sign off.
Yeah, he raised about $300,000, and we built basically a Ronald McDonald House at the Kilimanjaro Christian Medical Center. That's one of the cancer centers that'll house up to 100 patients. They're just completing that project now, and now we're going to build a school that goes with it. So some of these kids that have leukemia that have to stay for prolonged periods of time, they can actually get schooling there and a playground and things like that. So we're actually, again, the XCancer, we like to think it's more of a global thing, which we'll talk, I'm sure, about theranostic trials too, but we're trying to reach everywhere.
I like to think that I had a fair idea of all the stuff you guys were involved in, and you always have one more or another thing, and it's awesome because the ambition and the focus on quality and service is so tremendous. I want to dig into that a little bit, especially from a clinical trial perspective. We've got folks obviously who listen to the podcast who have conducted them or participated, but we also have some folks that maybe come from a different side of the radio pharma world, maybe an investor side. Shed a little light on things for us. What, from a very practical perspective, what kinds of preconceived notions or questions do patients bring you before they decide to enroll in a trial?
Yeah, that's a great topic. And I'd even back up a little bit further, because there's a lot of, who does the research? And you typically think at big academic centers, and they do a lot of basic research there also. And that's important research, but it's kind of in silos. I like to think that it's more to promote some of those professors. And if that's something very good, they get it licensed out by a pharmaceutical company, et cetera. Most new drug development comes from the private sector, from pharmaceutical world. And that's who we've, tied our hitch to. And that's who we primarily work with. And they have scientists that do preclinical research, the mice, the rats. When I say I do a lot of research, I think my patients are like, where's the microscopes and mice and rats and scientists? I go, that's all done at drug companies. We take it from when they're ready to go into humans, which we then call clinical trials, and they don't have patients, so they have to come out to centers. And who typically does that research has been the academic centers, because they have the village of people to do all that. And community cancer centers typically have about 5 to 7 employees per doctor. That's not enough to run a clinic and do research. So you have to put a real big investment into all that staff if you're going to try to build a research program. And then again, you got to build that reputation to actually even get a clinical trial of any a decent caliber. And so what we've done differently is we put that investment in because I knew the future was in clinical trials, and we come up with the efficiencies. So where drug companies can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a day to run a clinical trial, I mean, it can be talking $1 billion within 3 years or so. When they go to an academic center, the one thing that they struggle with is bureaucracy. Committee after committee, legal reviews. It can take over a year to open a study, where we can open that same study in 2 to 3 weeks if we need to, on average, and it's usually slowed down by the pharmaceutical companies. It might be 1 or 2 months, but we've done it quickly as 2 to 3 weeks. When patients come in, one of the things I do with every new patient, even if it's a very localized Gleason 6 and the discussion doesn't even pertain to research, I always spend 15 or 20 minutes with every new patient just dispelling a lot of the myths and misconceptions about research. After 20 years, I haven't skimped on a patient, because it puts a seed there that they start thinking. And then every time they come in, we're always discussing research, so it builds on that seed. But a lot of the things I'll first say to a patient, I say, if somebody has metastatic disease, one of the things I'll say is, look, there's 2 ways to make you live longer. One is taking our current medicines that are approved and using them maybe more wisely, not stopping them with PSA progression alone, making sure there's radiographic progression, or maybe using different combinations that we wouldn't typically consider, just to build a bridge until the next trial's open. But the second way to make someone live longer are new drugs, and that's through clinical trials. And my spiel kind of goes, how many clinical trials do you think are out there for prostate cancer today? Well, if you look on clinicaltrials.gov, there's about 1,200. Now, not all those are good studies, not all those are going to lead to new therapies, but there's still several dozen that could lead to new therapies or new imaging. And if you look at all cancer types, there's about 90,000 clinical trials, 12,000 breast cancer trials, 6,000 colon cancer trials. So why aren't we coming out with, more new treatments all the time, right? Well, so I said, should we blame the government? I like to blame the government, but I know Richard Pazdur is a good guy. Here, they're kind of like a judge that can't give the verdict if they haven't heard the case. And so it's up to us to complete the trials and then ship it off to the FDA to then they can put their judgment on it, right? And so the biggest problem then is filling the trials. And nearly half of all oncology trials go unfilled, and we never get the answer. And so that's because nationwide, 3 to 5% of cancer patients ever go on a clinical trial, right? And so is it their fault? No. And what I would say is the vast majority of oncologists in the United States have the tough job. They don't get to focus on one cancer type. They got to treat breast cancer, pancreatic, leukemia, melanoma, myeloma. They'd have thousands of trials to try to keep up with. And most people, even me, I only focus on my trials I have open at my center. I don't know what's going on in Wichita or Albuquerque or Seattle necessarily. So a patient goes into their oncologist, thinks they're being told all their options, never gets research mentioned because that doctor probably isn't doing research, walks out thinking there isn't any research, otherwise they would have told me about it, and right there it kind of falls flat on its face. And right. I like to say, really the onus, unfortunately, is on the patient and their family to go out and find their own trials. But nobody's had that discussion to tell them that, and most patients wouldn't know where to look or what's a good study or a bad study, or they're intimidated saying, how would I ever travel to another city? That's just unrealistic. But yet, if you learn about it, I have an 80-year-old man coming up from Austin, Texas, that's on a clinical trial, and they pay for his airfare, hotel, food, meals. The treatment is free. So we dispel some of these myths. And so one of the things I'll say is, they'll often say, well, here's all these FDA-approved therapies. Let's use those up first. And when they fail, then let's consider research like a last-ditch effort. Well, the problem with that is I have about 60 studies open from the very initial diagnosis all the way through pre-surgery radiation, all the way through recurrence, all the way through metastatic, all the way through many lines. And so if you come to me at the end, you can't go back to those studies. You just missed out on many clinical trials. I had one guy, 12 different clinical trials he went on over the course of his disease, right? The second thing people might say is, well, who pays for it? This is experimental. There's movies where insurance is denying it because it's experimental. They're not going to pay for it. I like to say, for the most part, this is a beautiful thing that would solve most of this country's economic crisis, healthcare being a big part of that. The number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States, medical. We have pills that cost $15,000, $20,000 a month. We have injectable drugs that are $100,000 a month. We have Theranostics now, Pluvicto, that's upwards of $300,000. Now, knock on wood, in 21 years, I've never had a patient file medical bankruptcy. I've never sent a patient to collections, nor will I. Each year, we write off about $300,000 of patients' bills saying you don't owe us anymore. We couldn't do that if we were just doing Medicare, Medicaid, Blue Cross, United Healthcare, et cetera. But we can do that because when we do clinical trials, who's covering the costs of all of that? Not you, not me, not Medicare, not taxpayer dollars, not business owners, the pharmaceutical companies, right? So we're kind of shifting a lot of those healthcare costs, whether it's the imaging component or the treatment component, over to the pharmaceutical companies. Then we're saving healthcare dollars for society. We're saving healthcare dollars for patients. And to be transparent, we are getting paid to do the research. They pay us quite well, but we don't just pat our wallet. Now we can give back when patients don't have insurance. Come in, I can see them for free. And maybe they will, maybe they won't go on a clinical trial and cover it down the road. But it all works out that way. But we can also put investment in our team, in new equipment, so we can do first in world PET scans, things like that. It's really a win-win-win-win for everybody there. The final thing I'd say about research, which is the biggest one, is it's experimental. We don't know how it's going to work. I don't want to be a guinea pig, right?
I was going to ask about that. Yeah, it's not a silver bullet, right? There's some really cool stuff in research, but we don't know. It's in research because we don't know what the outcome is yet. Is that a discussion you have to have?
Yeah, we do. It's part of my spiel. So about half the drugs we have are experimental, not FDA approved. But about half of our trials are drugs that are already FDA approved, but maybe for another cancer or another setting or alone. And now we're going to give it in a combination or give it earlier in the disease, or a PARP inhibitor approved in breast cancer is now going to be used in prostate cancer. It's already FDA approved. We know it works. We know the tolerance of it. But now it's just going to be used in another cancer. But now if I give that drug, now it's going to be covered for free from the pharmaceutical company. So sometimes I open research trials because it's exciting science. Sometimes I open it because I can get free drug for patient, which who are otherwise struggling to pay for their medicines. Sometimes I open, I want a relationship. If Johns Hopkins just called us and want to participate in a study, and I like that relationship. It's not necessarily maybe a really exciting study, but I want that relationship going forward. So there's many reasons we open a clinical trial. So some of the drugs aren't even necessarily experimental in the minds of what patients would think is experimental. And the other ones that aren't approved, that you could call guinea pig type drugs, I tell my patients, I say, name me a safety feature in a car in the 1970s. All right, maybe a lap belt, maybe. And now how about today, right? They drive themselves, lane changing, the steering wheel vibrates, airbags, so name how we treated a cancer in the 1970s. We're just trying to kill it with some chemotherapy. Right. Nowadays,
Carpet
there's so
bombing.
many more targeted, right? And I like to think like, every drug has potential side effects, but the way we're developing now is really meant not just to kill cancer, but try to maintain quality of life, lesser toxicities. But I tell patients I have 3 promises to them if I give them any drug, FDA approved, or they're going to be first in world. 3 promises. First promise, you only stay on the medicine if it's going to help you. The moment we know it's no longer benefiting you, that's growing on scans, we're going to stop it. There's no benefit of being on it when it's no longer helping you. So how do we know if it's working or not? Well, we're going to get scans. On research, you're going to get scans typically every 2 to 3 months, paid for by the pharmaceutical company. In standard of care, you might get scans every 6 to 12 months, paid for by you and your insurance. The second promise, it can't be hurting you. Well, this is them telling me. And it doesn't matter if it's research or not. If they come back and say it's a mild diarrhea and a little bit of nausea, I'm going to say, can you live with it? They're going to say, yeah, we'll stay on it. But if they come back and say, I've not been out of bed in 2 weeks, I've had nonstop diarrhea, my mouth's so sore I can't eat, I stand up, I'm dizzy, we're going to stop either one, right? It's like you go to a restaurant, you have a good meal, you go back. If you go and get food poisoning, you're probably never going back. That's what doctors have been trained to do with medicines forever. And the third promise is it can't break the bank. One, research is free. Over on standard of care, number 1 cause of bankruptcy in the United States. Standard of care, you get about 10 drugs to work with in advanced prostate cancer. Research, you have the same 10 plus hundreds more to pick from, right? So when I explain that to patients are like, wow, yeah, sign me up. When can I get on one? So you just put that seed there and let them, let that grow.
As a layperson, why aren't more people doing what you're doing? I mean, I don't mean to dismiss any of your intelligence, your innovation, but this, when you lay it out like this, it sounds so logical. And I believe I've heard you talk about just the great numbers of Americans that get their care at community health centers or cancer centers.
The majority, yeah.
Why isn't this more widely done? It's
a big hurdle to overcome that reputation to get into the studies. Right? I mean, let's say a community center says, that's great, we're going to start research tomorrow. What would that look like? They would have to hire staff and then train them. They don't even have a study yet, right? And then they got to convince a drug company to consider them as one of the sites. They don't have any reputation for ever running a study. Then let's say they get a study. Now it's, they don't have all the efficiency they have. It could take a year or more to open that study. And then now they put a patient on finally. And now it might be 3 months before they get the first payment on that patient. They're a year and a half, 2 years into paying a lot of salaries in the red. And so a lot of people have tried research and very few succeed in the community. Their overhead runs more than they bring in. Okay. That's one of the benefits XCancer. It's not just XCancer. It's not commercial for XCancer. There's other groups doing this similar things. But what we bring to them is say, look, you don't have to hire all that staff. We bring our reputation immediately. We had a group in Dayton physicians. They had never done research. We started working with them. There's a hepatocellular trial. Because of our experience, they allowed them to do first in world. And shortly after, they did a second first in world. So, then they start building their own reputation, right? So some of that is overcoming. Some of it is the work and the liability. I mean, most businesses worry when the IRS knocks. Now you got the IRS and the FDA come and inspect you, right? And that's pretty scary. So you have to do it right. And a lot of people that we worked with, out of those 45 centers we worked with, a lot of them, they said they all want to do research. They all talk the talk. But the issue is they kind of treat it like another ancillary service. Here's my pharmacy. Here's my lab. Here's my research because I have 2 coordinators and I'll let them go do their work and have me sign stuff. No, you can't approach it that way. It's got to start with the investigators running it. There's what's called PI oversight. They need to be involved. Every patient looking at them saying, are they a clinical trial? And then everybody else there is to support you, right? So you have to have a champion physician, a champion administrator, and a champion research director or coordinator. If you have those 3 things, you're set for success in research. And if we just give you a jump start, that's what we give you as XCancer, a jump start, and let you go. And if you stay with us or take off and run on your own.
That makes sense. And so that's what if I'm remembering, is that what you call your XCancer Clinical Research Network? Is that kind of the term you guys have put on it?
Yeah. And now we're expanding into the Theranostic side because I've just got back to speaking at the PSMA and Beyond conference out at UCLA. And one of the things I spoke about was, especially with the approval now of Pluvicto pre-chemotherapy, and it was like, all these places are now going to want to give Pluvicto earlier. And I do think we'll see an increase, but not as much as you'd think in the community center. I think you'll actually see more in the urology practices, and here's why. We just set up Dothan, Alabama, who I mentioned before. 4 oncologists had never touched research until a couple years ago. They started working with XCancer. They've done a phenomenal job with drug studies for breast, lung, etc. But now they see the future of theranostic trials, so they're going both feet in. They're building a Theranostic center that'll be up and running mid-2025, and they'll be able to do first in world for any tumor type. But it's about a $1.7 million investment and recurring about $1.5 million a year. Now you take the general community oncology practice that's treating breast, lung, colon, lymphoma, all these other cancers and say, I'm going to put that investment for a couple Pluvictos and a couple Lutatheras a year. Until more Theranostics are approved, I don't think you're going to see that. Now urologists, they're very business savvy, motivated. They're already given more and more ARPIs and maybe even some chemotherapy or into the earlier setting. I could see them doing that because they have more prostate patients. Their focus is in prostate, right?
Right. Prostate is kind of the leading edge right now in therapy.
Yeah, it is. Isn't it? Out of about 6 on our website, which we'll talk about in a minute, I'm sure, there's about 670 trials.
Yeah, we'll get there.
About 670 trials today, and I think 160 of them are prostate. So by far, that's leading the way. But my solution then for these community centers that want to get into Theranostics is, let's not just set up a Theranostics program. Let's set up a Theranostic clinical trials program. Because now there are hundreds of options. They all need accrual. They actually, from a revenue standpoint, pay significantly better than a regular drug study. So all of a sudden, it opens up a lot more opportunities. And so I'm not against community centers getting involved with Theranostics. I just think if they're going to do it the right way, they should get involved with Theranostic trials. And that's what XCancer has really done now, too. A couple of years ago, I changed my life when I brought in Subby Anzalone. He was with Cardinal Health for a number of years, and he was my RSO. He helped set me up with radium back in 2011. Couldn't have done without him. And really, I brought him on, hired him, and he's the director of my Theranostic, so he can serve as RSO, the strategic, setting up centers. And so now we married our research program with the Theranostics, and that's really our biggest niche right now.
Tremendous work. I think you kind of led me right to where I wanted to go. Based on what you're talking about, I hopefully people will be sharing this podcast, and I'm sure it will reach both professionals, but also family members and patients who are looking for direction or new solutions. And one of the really cool things you've done that I want to talk about is theranostictrials.org. Tell me a little bit about the website, who's it for, and discuss how it has, as I like to think of it, almost two lanes, one for kind of the medical professionals and kind of one for like the patients and families, which I think is really cool, because that's the biggest question you get is, well, how can I make sure my loved one's getting or aware of these types of activities? Tell me a little bit about the website. Again, theranostictrials.org.
Yeah, thank you. So there's a website, the government-run website, clinicaltrials.gov, and it lists every clinical trial. But if you go to it, it's very daunting. Like I said, there's over 90,000 cancer trials on there, and it's very scientific based. The data, the literature on there. It's not very patient friendly. It's not even very physician friendly at times. And I wasn't trying to recreate that, but Theranostics is in my mind, going to be a major player going forward. It's not like another drug like a PARP inhibitor or a checkpoint inhibitor. This is a whole new way of treating cancers that isn't going away. It's going to be a major player in the future, I believe, along with immune therapies, CAR T-cell, et cetera. But I think Theranostics is going to be a major player in it. So that's the field I'm in. I said, we need to create a site that, again, focusing on access, education for all levels, and that's what we created. And so theranostictrials.org is multifaceted. It started with a small vision. It's growing, and I just even had new ideas today to add on to it. The one piece is education. So you alluded to it, who's it for? I like to say it's for three different groups of people: for patients, for physicians, and then for industry. And there's kind of three different paths in there. And with patients, it's all about education and access. So what are these theranostics? What is radioactivity? What's the half-life? What's alpha and beta? But we put it in such a simple way. I like to use a truck analogy. Here's all the components of a theranostic. You have a target on a cancer cell. I like to say it's like a tattoo on someone's skin. And let's say a certain biker gang has a certain shoulder tattoo. We can identify them. Certain cancers may have a marking, a antigen, a protein that is unique to that type of cancer.
And a shout out to all the biker gang members who are now listening.
Right, I'm from South Dakota. We have Sturgis. It's all good.
Dr. Luke will be out there. You can find him by his tattoo.
It's right. And then you have the drug component, which I like to give the analogy of, it's like a semi truck pulling a trailer. The semi truck is the ligand. It's the GPS. We can set it to find a target. And then in the truck itself, you either have light bulbs, which are the radioisotopes that are diagnostic to light up where the cancer is, or you have bombs that go back to then kill the cancer, like lutetium. But then there's a couple more pieces. There's a linker, which is like the hitch that connects the truck to the trailer. And there's the chelators, which kind of strap down the product in the back of the trailers, right? And all those pieces matter. But it's very simple education like that on there. It's a
great breakdown.
Hey, when I was a simple oncologist, we deal with milligrams and grams, and now we're dealing with sieverts and becquerels and curies and all these other units, and that's all explained on there. But for patients and even a lot of oncologists that haven't dealt in this field, there's simple education like that. For physicians, it's more about again, the simple education knowledge, but also how to set up one of these centers, how they can get access to, if they want to get into Theranostics or Theranostic trials. And then for industry, it's about networking and awareness. So there's a lot of people that go into, a lot of organizations that go into developing a theranostic and getting it all the way to the patient. You got the sponsors, you got the CDMOs, you got couriers, you got waste disposal, you got people running the clinical trials like CROs and EDCs, you got radiologists, you have venture capitalists, you go on, patient advocacy groups. So we created a connect page on there where all of these different people can put advertisement pages about who they are. So it's almost like a LinkedIn where they can go find people that they may need. So all of that is on there. We have the RLT components. So we list every isotope that's being studied today globally with the energy levels, the decay methods, the half-lives. We have all the targets. We just listed STEAP2 on there, which is a new target for prostate cancer. But the main purpose is the search engine for the cancer. So you put in your type of cancer, again, today, 35 different types of cancer, and it lists every trial globally. It's updated weekly. But the difference is from clinicaltrials.gov, this is information that's put in by the pharmaceutical company that is meant for all the way down to a patient level. They can put videos on how the drug simply works, or they might put a link to a manuscript or upload a poster from a presentation, so you don't have to go to separate websites to PubMed to find where's that paper about this clinical trial. It lists all the centers that are conducting the clinical trial. That's very similar to clinicaltrials.gov. Also on this website, we have updated news of new FDA approvals. We're now going to start putting podcasts on there. Maybe we'll upload this podcast on there. We'd be honored. It would be our first
repost, if you will.
Yeah.
We'll take it.
Yeah, and we have the conference schedule of Theranostic conferences around the world. But the whole purpose goes back to increasing education, access, tearing down barriers, trying to get more people on these clinical trials, raising awareness and interest.
We've only scratched the surface of what you're doing. I don't know how you do it all. Clearly, you have cloned yourself or something like that. And but
great
it's
team.
amazing.
I got a great team behind me.
You do have a great team. I have worked with them, and they are.
And I
great.
use the Force. And that's my second Star Wars analogy.
Jedi mind tricks. Yes, thank you. This is going to become our recurring theme. We'll require every guest to make at least one Star Wars reference, which would be great. Well, not quite Star Wars, but we always like to close with our two kind of questions of all our guests. And so, the first one is: if all this succeeds, meaning clinical trials keep going well, radiopharma keeps advancing, there's continued investment, the momentum continues. What do you think the world looks like in 5 years? We know that in 5 years, it won't be a fully mature industry and we won't have, thousands and thousands of drugs. But, in what we can project out into the future, what do you think, where are we at in 5 years?
Yeah, you're right. Things don't happen so quickly, but I'd like to see a lot more community cancer centers become the go-to place and not just always an academic center when you need a site, which is going to bring those therapies closer to home. I think we'll know a lot more about Theranostics by then, again, which is the best method to keep it on tumor and less floating around the body, which isotopes are better. I'd like to see, I have a strong goal of getting Theranostics into Tanzania, Africa in that 5 years. I just gave a talk over there at this Kilimanjaro International Cancer Conference, and I said, if it's a spear, we're at the spear tip, my center, and they're kind of back just screening with PSAs, but they have some very well-trained doctors, a radiation oncologist that trained in South Africa, an oncologist trained in Germany. They have 4 volts now. They're putting in linear accelerators, a cyclotron in Dar es Salaam. I said, you guys, that gap is not as far apart as you'd think for you guys to be getting into PET scans and even some Theranostic. So I'll give a shout out to Seamus Gleason when he was with Bayer. We were this close to getting them free radium 223 for in Tanzania at the Kilimanjaro Christian Medical Center, and then he left and of course went to Clarity, and then it fell apart when he left. He
now he's just getting
big shoes to fill, and nobody could fill it. So, but yeah, that's what I'd like to see.
But that is very cool. I'm sure, knowing your track record, you're going to get that done in under 5 years. And the other final question, if you could wave a magic wand, or if you prefer a Jedi hand or lightsaber, what one challenge or roadblock to getting us to that better future 5 years from now? What's the roadblock or hurdle you would remove?
Yeah, I wish I had a loud enough megaphone to reach everybody about, clinical trials. I mean, this is helping. I did a radio show for a couple of years in the past talking about a lot of this, and you just never know who's all listening, but many people will, and there'll probably be some people come in from that, but there's many people that won't get access to this. They're going to have cancer that aren't going to still know about clinical trials. And I think if there was a way to demystify, de-scare people about research. That's why even in my tagline, I have expanding the reach of cancer innovations, because I hate to use the word like research, and I think that can scare some people, right? Without giving them the opportunity to kind of go through the myths and misconceptions.
Well, you are well on your way. The XCancer, I don't know what you want to call it, brand, universe. It's a force for good out there. The one thing that you have that nobody that has been on the show has is a branded race car. Can you tell us about that?
Good. That leads right into it. Yeah, my son loves speed, and my grandpa was a mechanic. My father was a mechanic. I have brothers that raced everything. I can't change oil. I like nice cars, but my son, he had the gene, and he about killed himself one day on a motorcycle. I said, no more motorcycles. But I probably surprised him when I said, let's get you into professional racing. So he jumped at that. So this sounds like a bargain.
What parent hasn't said that to their child?
Yeah. You're right. So we put him in the Skip Barber racing program, in the Formula program. He did really well. Now he's joined a team called D-Force, and he's on the road to Indy. I'm very excited. I'm heading down next week to New Orleans to watch him race. And you know, we've sponsored the professional soccer team in Omaha in the past with the XCancer on the kit. And you know, it's also just about having discussion, awareness. When I go into the first time I wore a sweatshirt that said XCancer Motorsports, went in a grocery store, I think I had 4 people stop and say, "Tell me about this." It doesn't equate what Motorsports, XCancer, and it's bringing awareness on the track. And this is an international sport. I'll tell you a funny story. I just went, again to Tanzania, and I always bring a bag of soccer balls and T-shirts to give to the kids that are affiliated with them. And I always get stopped because I look like I'm a commercial guy going to sell this and make some money. And so I was waiting for them to stop me, and they did. And they said, have your passport? And they're like, Luke Nordquist. And I said, yep. And they're like, you're not Thomas? I said, nope. I said, I'm Luke. And he's like, where's Thomas? And I said, my son? And like, yeah. I'm like, he's sick at home. He was supposed to make the trip, and he got sick last moment. And I said, but how do you know my son Thomas? And he pulls up his phone and has a picture of him racing. So it's really kind of getting out there. I think he gets 2 or 3 million.
Nobody wants to meet the doctor when they can meet the race car driver. I mean, come on.
I know. Yeah. So he gets 2 or 3 million views on social media every month. And if you want to follow him on Instagram, it's Thomas Nordquist 93. But the funny story, this is the last one I'll tell you. So one of his guys he races with, a great guy, his father, Jordy Lambros, is a 3rd generation Sicilian, lives in Long Island. And he makes the fine platinum jewelry for Tiffany's, Cartier, Harry Winston. So now he's started making platinum XCancer necklaces with like pink diamonds for breast cancer. And so now he's looking at selling this to jewelry stores with the money going back to the foundation. So, it's who knows where the next thing goes. I didn't know I'd be in jewelry either.
Wow. I don't even know where to begin. Well, we'll do our first jewelry episode with you in a few weeks.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe that could be like a Home Shopping Network style thing. Where like, if you act now, you get the bracelet too. You get the bracelet too.
Right.
Oh, man.
Love it.
Well,
I love it.
Dr. Luke Nordquist, amazing stuff. So much going on. XCancer.com is the right place to go if you want to learn about any and all of this.
Absolutely.
We'll send people there. Give him a call. He's working. He's innovating. He's giving soccer balls to kids. He's watching race cars go by. I don't think we'll have a guest this interesting. And we've had Seamus on. I will tell Seamus,
I'm nowhere near Seamus.
Seamus was rock climbing before he joined us, I think. But this is pretty darn cool stuff, and especially great work you're doing for people and families battling cancer and advancing the academic work as well, the clinical trial work. Big, huge thanks to you for joining us. Dr. Luke Nordquist of XCancer, thank you so much for joining the show. We'll have you back on soon.
I'll love to, anytime.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great day.